Sometimes the people we underestimate the most are the ones who teach us what truly matters. In the world where everyone seemed to want something from her, Arden Chase had built walls so high that she'd forgotten what it felt like to trust. She was a successful CEO with everything money could buy, but lately she'd been questioning everyone's motives, including her new gardener, Fintan, a quiet single father who worked her estate grounds. So she decided to test him. She pretended to fall asleep on her living room couch while he worked nearby, watching to see what he would do when no one was looking. What happened next would leave her breathless and questioning everything she thought she knew about people. Would this humble man's simple act of integrity be enough to break through the walls she'd spent years building? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The estate sat on 12 acres of prime Connecticut land, a sprawling testament to old money and newer success. Stone walls marked its boundaries, and within them, meticulously designed gardens stretched in every direction. Rose beds that bloomed in careful succession, hedges trimmed to architectural precision, and winding paths of aged brick that led to hidden corners where fountains whispered their eternal songs. It was the kind of property that appeared in magazines, that people drove slowly past, hoping for a glimpse through the iron gates. Arden Chase had inherited the bones of it from her parents, but she'd built the rest herself. The fortune, the business empire, the reputation as one of the most formidable CEOs in the pharmaceutical industry, all of it earned through sleepless nights and ruthless focus. At 43, she commanded boardrooms with the same cool efficiency she brought to everything in her life. Control was her currency, and she spent it wisely. The main house was Georgian revival, all white columns and black shutters, with rooms that echoed too much when you walked through them alone, which Arden did every evening, her heels clicking against hardwood floors that had been installed by craftsmen her great-grandfather hired. The furniture was elegant, expensive, carefully chosen. Every piece had a purpose, a place. Nothing was left to chance. She stood now in her corner office on the 40th floor of Chase Pharmaceuticals, looking out at the city spread below her like a promise she'd already claimed. Her assistant, Claire, knocked softly before entering, always soft, always respectful of the invisible boundaries Arden maintained. "The Morgan account projections are ready for your review," Claire said, setting a leather folder on the desk. She was 32, efficient, loyal, had been with Arden for 5 years and knew better than most when to speak and when to simply execute. "Thank you." Arden didn't turn from the window. "Anything else?" Marcus called again. Third time this week. At that, Arden did turn. Marcus Hendrick was her primary competitor, a man who'd built his pharmaceutical company on aggressive acquisitions and questionable ethics. They'd circled each other for years, professional adversaries who smiled at industry events while calculating each other's vulnerabilities. "Let him call," Arden said. "He's fishing," Claire nodded, understanding without needing details. That was the thing about working for Arden. You learned to read between silences. "Will you be working late tonight?" "No, I'm heading home at 6. Something in Claire's expression shifted, surprise perhaps, or concern. Arden rarely left before 8. "Everything all right?" "Everything's fine." Arden returned to her desk, opened the folder, effectively ending the conversation. Claire took the hint and left, closing the door with a quiet click that seemed to seal Arden back into her preferred solitude. But everything wasn't fine, though Arden would never admit it aloud. The truth was that lately, the silence of the estate had begun to feel less like peace and more like emptiness. She'd catch herself standing at windows, watching the gardens, feeling something she couldn't quite name. Loneliness seemed too simple a word, too common. She preferred to think of it as an awareness of absence. Her parents had died 6 years ago, a car accident on a rainy October evening, sudden and senseless. They'd left her everything, the estate, the majority shares in the company her father had founded, and a grief so profound it had nearly consumed her. Instead, she'd channeled it into work, into building something that couldn't be taken away by chance or cruelty, but they'd also left her alone in a way that money couldn't fix. The divorce had come 2 years after their deaths. Richard had seemed like the right choice, stable, successful, from the same world she inhabited. But he'd wanted access more than he'd wanted her. When she discovered he'd been selling company information to competitors, the betrayal had been almost worse than losing her parents. At least their leaving hadn't been a choice. She'd had the locks changed, the passwords reset, the prenuptial agreement enforced with cold precision. And she'd added another layer to those walls everyone said she had. Let them say it. Walls kept you safe. Walls kept the world at a manageable distance. The drive home took 40 minutes through autumn countryside, going gold and crimson. Arden had made this drive thousands of times, knew every curve and landmark. The stone walls appeared first, then the gates, black iron scrollwork that opened automatically as her car approached. The driveway curved through a tunnel of old maples, the leaves drifting down like gentle warnings that nothing lasted forever. Rosa's car was still in the circular drive. The housekeeper stayed late on Thursdays, preparing meals for the week ahead. Rosa had been with the family for 20 years, had known Arden since she was a young woman, just beginning to understand what she would inherit. If anyone had earned the right to speak plainly, it was Rosa, though even she maintained a careful respect for boundaries. The gardens looked immaculate as always, but Arden paused before going inside, studying them with an eye that had grown increasingly critical. Something was different. Better, actually. The roses had been dead-headed with expert precision. The beds weeded so thoroughly you could see the rich, dark soil. The hedges bore the marks of someone who understood not just how to trim, but how to shape growth into art. Fintan O'Brien had started 3 weeks ago, after old Thomas finally retired at 79. Thomas had maintained the grounds for 30 years, had known what he was doing, but age had slowed him down. Finding a replacement had been harder than Arden expected. The job required skill, dedication, and a willingness to work on an estate that felt more like a private world than a simple property. Fintan had come recommended by Father Michael at St. Catherine's, the church her parents had attended faithfully. He was Irish, soft-spoken, with capable hands and a respectful manner that put him somewhere in his late 30s. More importantly, he seemed to understand plants the way some people understood music, intuitively, with a feel for what they needed. He was a single father, Rosa had mentioned, raising a daughter on his own after his wife passed away. Arden had nodded at this information, filed it away as relevant but not personal. She made it a policy not to involve herself in the private lives of those who worked for her. Professional boundaries kept things simple, kept expectations clear, but she'd noticed things. The careful way he moved through the gardens, never rushing but always purposeful. The lunch he brought in a battered cooler, eaten quickly on the stone bench by the fountain. The faded work clothes that had been mended more than once, the boots that had seen better days but were meticulously clean. She noticed and told herself it was simply good management to observe those in her employ. Rosa was in the kitchen when Arden entered through the side door, the one that led past the mudroom and into the heart of the home's daily operations. The scent of something rich and savory filled the air, beef stew probably, or pot roast. Comfort food her mother used to make. The pruning shears were gone. Arden stood in the garden shed on Saturday morning, staring at the empty space on the pegboard where the expensive Felco shears should have been hanging. She'd purchased them herself last spring, Swiss-made, professional-grade, nearly $200. The kind of tool a serious gardener appreciated. The kind that didn't just disappear. She checked the workbench, the shelves, even the floor beneath where they hung. Nothing. Her jaw tightened as she walked back outside, scanning the grounds as though the shears might materialize if she looked hard enough. But she knew what had happened. She knew, and the knowing sat in her chest like a stone. Fintan had taken them. The thought arrived fully formed, carrying with it a familiar weight of disappointment that felt almost comfortable. Of course he had. Why wouldn't he? Everyone took something eventually. Everyone had an angle, a need, a justification. She'd been foolish to think a man struggling to raise a daughter on a gardener's salary would be any different. She walked back toward the house, her mind already calculating. The shears were replaceable. That wasn't the point. The point was trust, or rather the confirmation that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Again, still, always. Inside, she found Rosa folding linens in the laundry room, the warm scent of fabric softener filling the small space. "Have you seen the good pruning shears?" Arden asked, keeping her voice neutral. "The Felco ones?" Rosa looked up, thoughtful. "The red-handled ones. I saw Fintan using them last week on the roses. Beautiful work he did, too. Those bushes haven't looked that good in years. Did you see him put them back?" "Can't say I noticed." Rosa returned to her folding, smoothing a pillowcase with practiced hands. "I'm sure they're around somewhere. That man is meticulous about tools. Always cleaning and organizing things in the shed?" Arden nodded, not trusting herself to say more. She left Rosa to her work and went to her office, the one in the house, not the sterile corporate space downtown. This room was warmer, with her father's old desk and the leather chair that still held the ghost of his pipe tobacco smell. The walls were lined with books and family photographs, including the one she kept in an ornate silver frame on the credenza, her parents on their 40th anniversary. Her mother's hand resting on her father's shoulder, both of them smiling with the ease of people who'd built something lasting together. She sat down heavily, feeling the weight of her own cynicism pressing down on her shoulders. Part of her wanted to march out to the garden right now and confront Fintan, demand an explanation, get the inevitable lies and excuses over with. But another part, smaller, quieter, urged caution. Claire would tell her to give him the benefit of the doubt. Claire always saw the best in people, which was either admirable or naive, depending on Arden's mood. Today it felt naive, but then again, what if she was wrong? The question unsettled her more than the missing shears did. Because if she was wrong, it meant she'd become the kind of person who assumed the worst without evidence, who let pass betrayals, poison, present possibilities. It meant Richard and all the others who'd used her had won something more valuable than money or information. They'd won her ability to see clearly, to judge fairly. Her father used to say that character revealed itself in small moments, in the choices people made when they thought no one was watching. He'd built a pharmaceutical empire on that principle, hiring people others overlooked because he saw something in them they hadn't yet seen in themselves. He'd been right more often than not, but he'd also been wrong. Richard had fooled them both. Arden opened her laptop, began composing an email to the agency she'd used to hire Fintan, then stopped. What would she say? That she suspected him of stealing based on nothing more than a missing tool and her own damaged ability to trust. That seemed premature. Unfair, even. She closed the laptop and stood, walking to the window that overlooked the back gardens. Fintan was out there now. She could see him working near the perennial beds, his movements efficient and purposeful. He'd arrived precisely at 8, as he did every Saturday, parking his old Toyota near the service entrance, carrying his battered lunch cooler and thermos. Always punctual, always professional. A thief wouldn't be so reliable, would he? Or was that exactly what a smart thief would do? Establish trust, blend in, wait for the right opportunity. The circular thinking was exhausting. She thought about Richard again, about the day she'd discovered his betrayal. It had been Claire who'd found the evidence, actually. Unusual file access patterns that didn't match Richard's normal behavior. When confronted, he tried to justify it, said he was only trying to help, that she'd shut him out of the business side of their life, and he'd needed to feel included, as though theft was a reasonable response to hurt feelings. The divorce lawyer had been efficient. The prenuptial agreement had been ironclad. Richard had left with nothing but his personal belongings, and whatever dignity he could salvage. She'd felt victorious for about a week, then just empty. Her phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Marcus called again. "Says it's urgent. Want me to schedule?" Arden typed back, "Monday afternoon. My office. Whatever Marcus wanted could wait." Right now, she had a more immediate problem to solve. She spent the rest of the morning trying to work, reviewing quarterly reports and preparing for Monday's board meeting. But her attention kept drifting to the window, to the man working in her gardens. Around noon, she saw him sit on the stone bench by the fountain, opening his cooler to eat. He ate slowly, without a phone to distract him. Just a man alone with his thoughts and his simple lunch. When he finished, he cleaned up carefully, tucking the containers back into his cooler, then returned to work. No shortcuts, no wasted motion, just steady, honest labor, or the appearance of it. By mid-afternoon, Arden had made a decision. She wouldn't confront him directly, not yet. Instead, she would observe. She would create opportunities to see how he behaved when he thought no one was watching. Test his character in small ways before making accusations she might regret. It wasn't that she wanted to be suspicious. She wanted to be wrong. She wanted Fintan to be exactly who he appeared to be, a decent man doing honest work. Someone she could trust to walk through her home and gardens without calculating what he could take, but wanting something didn't make it. True, Rosa found her in the office as the afternoon. Light began to slant golden through the windows. "You've been in here all day," she said, no judgment in her tone, just observation. "Something troubling you?" "Just work," Arden said automatically. Rosa studied her for a long moment, and Arden had the uncomfortable feeling of being seen through. Finally, Rosa said, "Your mother used to say that worry was interest paid on trouble before it came due." My mother said a lot of things. She did, and she was usually right. Rosa moved to the window, looked out at the gardens. "Fintan does beautiful work out there. Your father would have appreciated his touch with the roses." Arden joined her at the window. Together they watched as Fintan carefully tied back a climbing rose that had grown unruly, his movements gentle but sure. The living room couch faced the tall windows that looked out over the east gardens, but it also had a clear view down the hallway that led to the kitchen and mudroom. From where Arden positioned herself Tuesday afternoon, she could see anyone who entered through the side door, could watch them move through the house without being obvious about it. She felt ridiculous. At 43 years old, CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, she was lying on her own couch, pretending to nap like some amateur detective in a bad television movie. But she'd committed to this course of action, and Arden Chase didn't abandon plans halfway through, no matter how undignified they made her feel. The setup was simple. She'd left her purse on the side table, positioned so that the corner of a $100 bill showed from the open zipper. Another 20 lay on the floor beneath the table, as though it had fallen and gone unnoticed. Careless, but believably so. People dropped things. People got distracted. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, yoga pants, and a soft sweater that looked like something a person might actually nap in. Her hair was down, loosened from its usual professional twist. She'd even removed her watch and placed it on the coffee table, next to a book she'd been reading, a half-empty glass of water. The whole scene suggested a woman who'd settled in to relax and accidentally dozed off. The side door opened at precisely 1 o'clock. Fintan was nothing if not punctual. Arden closed her eyes, forced her breathing to slow and deepen. Her heart, however, refused to cooperate, hammering against her ribs with an intensity that felt surely visible. She concentrated on keeping her face relaxed, her body still. Through her barely closed lids, she could detect changes in light, movement in her peripheral vision. Footsteps in the hallway, quiet, respectful. The sound of the mudroom closet opening, probably where he stored supplies. Then silence for several long moments. Was he looking at her? Could he tell she was faking? More footsteps, these ones moving away toward the kitchen, the soft sound of water running. He was filling buckets for the indoor plants, the task Rosa had mentioned needing attention. The fiddle-leaf fig in the sunroom, the orchids on the dining room windowsills, the Boston ferns that hung in the breakfast nook. Arden kept her breathing steady, her body relaxed against the couch cushions. She'd positioned herself on her side, one arm tucked under the throw pillow, the other draped naturally across her waist, vulnerable, trusting, everything she normally wasn't. The footsteps returned, closer now. She sensed more than heard him pause near the living room entrance. Was he checking to see if she was really asleep? Or noticing the money? Her pulse quickened again. This was it, the moment that would confirm her suspicions or prove her wrong. She wasn't sure which outcome she wanted more. Fintan moved into the room. She could hear him now. The soft pad of his work boots on the hardwood, the faint jingle of something metal, keys perhaps, or tools in his pocket. He was moving slowly, carefully, and Arden realized he was trying not to wake her. That consideration touched something in her chest, something she immediately pushed away. Thieves could be considerate too, especially clever ones. He walked past the couch toward the windows. Through the tiny slits of her barely open eyes, she saw his shape, tall, lean, moving with quiet confidence. He was checking the Boston fern that hung near the south window, lifting its trailing fronds gently, testing the soil moisture with his fingers. Then he turned back, and she knew he'd seen the money. He moved closer to the side table, stopped. Arden's heart was so loud in her ears she was certain he must hear it. This was the moment. This was when she'd learn whether her cynicism was justified, or whether she'd become so damaged she could no longer recognize decency when it stood 3 feet away from her. She heard him bend down, the soft rustle of paper. Her stomach tightened, a sick feeling of vindication mixed with disappointment spreading through her chest. But then, a different sound. Not the whisper of paper being pocketed, but the gentle tap of something being placed on the wooden table. Once, twice, careful, deliberate, Arden's breath caught. She forced herself to keep her eyes closed, her body still, even as confusion replaced her certainty. Fintan straightened, stood there for another moment, and she had the strange sense he was looking at her, not with calculation or guilt, but with something softer. Then he moved away, back toward his work, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts and the money she'd used to test him. She waited until his footsteps faded completely before allowing her eyes to open fully. Slowly, she turned her head to look at the side table. The $100 bill was there, no longer peeking from her purse, but placed deliberately on the table's surface. Next to it, the 20 from the floor, both smoothed flat, positioned where she couldn't possibly miss them. He'd picked up the money and put it where it was safe, where she would find it. Arden sat up slowly, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. This wasn't what she'd expected. This wasn't what her experience had taught her to anticipate. People didn't do things like this. Not in her world, not anymore. They took opportunities when they appeared. They rationalized. They justified. But Fintan had simply corrected what he'd perceived as her carelessness and gone back to work. She stood, walked to the side table, picked up the bills with fingers that trembled slightly. The money felt different somehow, heavier with meaning than its actual value. It was evidence, but not of what she'd been looking for. From somewhere deeper in the house, she could hear him working, the quiet sounds of watering, of careful tending. She moved toward the sound without quite deciding to, drawn by a curiosity that went beyond simple observation. The sunroom was her mother's favorite space, all windows and light, filled with plants that required more attention than Arden usually had time to give. Fintan was there now, misting the fiddle-leaf fig that had started to brown at the edges under Thomas's aging care. He worked with complete focus, unaware she was watching from the doorway. His movements were precise but gentle, the kind of care that came from genuine respect rather than obligation. He spoke to the plant, so softly she almost missed it, a low murmur in what might have been Irish Gaelic. Not expecting a response, just the natural communion of someone who understood that growing things responded to attention. On the windowsill beside him, she noticed his lunchbox sitting open. Inside, carefully packed, was a simple sandwich, an apple, a thermos. And tucked into the lid, a child's drawing. Arden moved closer, unable to help herself. The drawing was done in crayon, the kind of art that came from young hands still learning control. It showed a garden full of flowers, impossibly bright and cheerful, with 2 stick figures standing among the blooms. One tall, one small. Across the top, in careful letters that suggested recent mastery of writing, "To Daddy, love, Maeve." Something cracked in Arden's chest. This was a man who kept his daughter's artwork in his lunchbox, who spoke gently to plants, who found money on the floor and put it somewhere safe without a second thought, who arrived early and worked late and never once asked for anything beyond what he'd been hired to provide, and she'd suspected him of theft. The shame was immediate and overwhelming. She backed away from the doorway before he could notice her, retreating to her office where she could think, could breathe, could figure out what this meant. Rosa found her there 20 minutes later, sitting at her father's desk with her head in her hands. "Are you ill?" Rosa asked, concern immediate in her voice. "No." Arden looked up, tried to smile. "Just tired." Rosa didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Fintan finished with the indoor plants. He said the fiddle leaf should perk up with regular misting. He's going to check on it each visit. That's good of him. He's a good man. Rosa said it simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world, as though Arden should have known it all along. After Rosa left, Arden sat for a long time, thinking about the difference between suspicion and wisdom, between protection and prison. She'd been so certain that everyone had an angle, that trust was just naivety waiting to be punished. But what if she was wrong? What if her determination to never be hurt again was actually the thing hurting her most? She thought about her father, about his belief in revealed character, about her mother's warning against borrowing trouble, about the way Fintan had touched those plants, gently, patiently, expecting nothing in return but the satisfaction of helping something flourish. The pruning shears turned up Thursday afternoon in the potting shed, the smaller outbuilding near the greenhouse that Arden rarely entered. She'd been looking for a particular trowel her mother had favored, something with a carved wooden handle, and there they were, hanging exactly where they should be, exactly where she simply hadn't thought to check. Her own mistake, her own careless assumption. Arden stood there holding the shears, feeling the weight of them, feeling the much heavier weight of what they represented. She'd been so ready to believe the worst, so primed by past betrayals that she'd leapt to suspicion without evidence, without even bothering to conduct a thorough search before passing judgment in her mind. She'd tested a good man because she'd forgotten how to recognize goodness. The shame from Tuesday returned, sharper now, cutting deeper. She set the shears back on their hook with careful deliberation, as though proper placement now could somehow undo her interior accusations. It couldn't, of course. Fintan had never known about her suspicions, but she knew, and that was enough to make her feel small in a way that had nothing to do with physical stature. Back in the house, she tried to focus on work. Marcus had called again 3 times now, and Claire was beginning to sound concerned in her messages. The quarterly board meeting was in a week, and there were preparations that required her attention. Revenue projections, market analysis, the proposed expansion into biologics that would position Chase Pharmaceuticals for the next decade of growth. But the numbers blurred on her screen. Her mind kept returning to that moment on Tuesday, watching Fintan carefully place her money where she'd find it. His respect for her property so automatic he hadn't even paused to consider keeping it. $20 probably meant more to him than it did to her. She spent that much on coffee without thinking, but his integrity hadn't operated on a sliding scale of convenience. She picked up her phone. "Called Claire." "Finally," Claire said, warmth in her voice. "I was beginning to think you'd been abducted. Sorry, it's been a strange week. Everything all right?" "You sound off." Arden considered the question. "Was everything all right?" She discovered she'd become someone she didn't particularly like, someone who assumed the worst because assuming the best had proven painful. That wasn't all right exactly, but it also felt like the beginning of something, awareness maybe, or at least the possibility of change. "I'm fine," she said, because that was easier than explaining. "What does Marcus want?" "He won't say. Just keeps insisting it's urgent and needs to be face-to-face. Schedule him for Monday afternoon. 2 o'clock. Are you sure? He's been pretty persistent, almost aggressive, I'm sure." Arden watched through her office window as Fintan worked on the perennial beds, preparing them for winter. His movements were methodical, efficient. He wore work gloves that had been patched at the fingertips, she noticed. Patched rather than replaced. Claire, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you do it? Trust people, I mean. After everything you've seen in this business, all the politics and positioning, how do you not become cynical? Silence on the other end, long enough that Arden wondered if the call had dropped. Then Claire said carefully, I think cynicism is easier than discernment. Assuming everyone is bad requires no effort, no judgment, no risk. But assuming everyone is good until proven otherwise, that takes courage or naivety. Maybe, but I'd rather be occasionally disappointed than constantly suspicious. The latter seems exhausting. It was exhausting. Arden hadn't realized how exhausting until this moment. Talking to Claire while watching a man work in her garden with quiet integrity. Understanding that she'd been carrying the weight of suspicion so long she'd forgotten it wasn't mandatory. You're right, Arden said. It is exhausting. After they hung up, Arden sat with that admission. Somewhere in the house, Rosa was preparing dinner. She could smell something with rosemary, something that made the house feel more like a home than it had in recent memory. Outside, the autumn light was going golden, making the gardens glow with a particular warmth that only came this time of year. On impulse, she stood and walked outside. Fintan was kneeling by the hostas, cutting back the dying foliage with careful attention to the crown of each plant. He looked up when he heard her approach, surprise flickering across his features before settling into his usual professional courtesy. Ms. Chase, he said, starting to stand. Please don't get up, she gestured for him to continue working. I just wanted to check how things are looking for winter. He settled back on his heels, gestured to the beds around them. These are ready now. The roses need one more feeding before the first hard frost, and I'd recommend mulching everything heavily this year. It's supposed to be a cold winter. You keep up with the weather forecasts? Have to. Plants don't care about our schedules. They respond to what's coming. He said it simply, matter of fact. Your mother planted these hostas, Rosa told me. They're beautiful specimens. Someone took good care of them. My mother loved this garden. She could spend hours out here just tending and planning. I can see her touch everywhere, Fintan said. The way things are laid out, the companion plantings. She understood how plants work together. Arden found herself sitting on the nearby stone bench, watching him work. This close, she noticed other details. The careful way he handled each plant, never rough or hurried. The small notebook that peeked from his shirt pocket, presumably for tracking what he did where. The quietness of his presence, comfortable with silence in a way most people weren't. How long have you been gardening? She asked. Since I was a boy. My grandfather had a small farm in County Cork. Vegetables mostly, but he kept a flower garden for my grandmother. Used to say that a man who couldn't grow something beautiful was missing part of his soul. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Taught me everything worth knowing. Fintan moved to the next hosta, his hands moving with practiced ease. Patience, mostly. Can't rush growth. Can't force things to be ready before their time. Just have to tend faithfully and trust the process. The words settled over Arden, like a gentle correction she hadn't known she needed. Can't force things. Can't rush. Just tend and trust. I found the pruning shears, she said suddenly. They were in the potting shed. I'd forgotten to check there. If he found her statement odd, announcing the location of found tools, he didn't show it. Ah, good. Those are fine shears. Worth keeping track of. Yes, they are. She paused, then added, I'm sorry, I should have looked more carefully before assuming they were missing. He glanced at her then, something shifting in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or at least an acknowledgement that they were talking about more than just garden tools. Things get misplaced. Easy enough to do in a property this size. She appreciated his grace, his willingness to accept her apology without requiring detailed explanation. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, Arden watching him work. Fintan focused on his task but not uncomfortable with her presence. Your daughter, Arden said. Maeve, that's an Irish name? It is, means she who intoxicates. He smiled, a softness entering his features. My wife chose it. Said the moment she held her she was drunk with love. That's beautiful. A waif was good with words. Better than me, certainly. He cut back the last of the hosta foliage, gathering the debris carefully. She'd have loved this place. The gardens especially. She always wanted space for flowers. Past tense. Was good. Would have loved. The losses contained in those words made Arden's chest tighten. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Thank you." He stood then, gathering his tools. "It's been 3 years now. You learn to carry it, the grief. Never gets lighter, but you get stronger." Arden thought about her own losses, her parents, even the death of her marriage. She'd gotten stronger, yes, but she'd also gotten harder. Walls instead of strength. Suspicion instead of wisdom. "I should let you finish," she said, standing. "Thank you for the update on the garden." "Of course." He nodded respectfully. "I'll be done in about an hour, if that's all right. Take whatever time you need." She walked back toward the house, feeling oddly lighter, as though the conversation had shifted something in her understanding of the world, or at least her place in it. At the door, she turned back to see him working again. His patched gloves, moving carefully through the garden her mother had loved, tending it with a care that honored what had come before. Rosa was in the kitchen when Arden entered, and she looked up with knowing eyes. "You talked to him," she said. "Not a question. I did. And he's a good man." Arden said it firmly, a declaration to herself as much as to Rosa. A genuinely good man. Rosa smiled, went back to her cooking. "I could have told you that 3 weeks ago. You did tell me that, and now you believe it." Yes, Arden thought. Now she believed it. The question was what she planned to do with that belief, and whether she had the courage to let it change her. Over the following weeks, Arden found herself creating opportunities to talk with Fintan. Not obviously, nothing that would seem inappropriate or make him uncomfortable, just casual conversations when their paths crossed. A question about the roses, an observation about the weather, small exchanges that accumulated into something resembling familiarity. She learned things. That he'd come to America 8 years ago with his wife, Oifa, chasing the dream of better opportunities. That he'd worked construction initially, hard labor that paid the bills, but left him exhausted. That Aoif had been a nurse, skilled and compassionate, until the cancer took her so quickly they'd barely had time to say goodbye. He told her these things in measured pieces, never overwhelming her with tragedy, just sharing his history the way anyone might when getting to know someone new. And Arden found herself sharing in return, about her parents, about the weight of inheriting not just wealth but expectations, about the loneliness of living in a house full of memories. One afternoon in late October, she was reviewing contracts in her office when movement outside caught her eye. Fintan was working near the old stone fountain, and something had fallen from his pocket. She watched as he bent to retrieve it, a small card, cream-colored, worn at the edges. Without thinking too much about why, she walked outside. "Everything all right?" she asked as she approached. He straightened quickly, slipping whatever it was back into his shirt pocket. "Yes, fine. Just dropped something." But she'd seen his expression in that unguarded moment, tenderness mixed with sadness, the look of someone touching something precious. "May I ask what it was?" He hesitated, then slowly withdrew the card again, held it so she could see. It was a recipe card, handwritten in flowing script that spoke of careful penmanship and taking time with small things. At the top, "Offa's Irish stew." "My wife's recipe," he said quietly. "Her grandmother taught her to make it. She copied it out for me before—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "I carry it with me. Silly habit, maybe. It's not silly." Arden looked at the card, at the careful annotations in the margins, the small heart drawn next to the instruction about browning the lamb. "It's a beautiful way to keep her close. Maeve and I make it every Sunday. Our tradition. She stands on a stool and helps me chop the carrots, even though they end up all different sizes." He smiled at the memory. "Says it tastes better when she helps." "I'm sure it does." He tucked the card away again, careful with it, reverent. "My grandmother used to say that recipes are love made tangible. The effort of writing it down, of passing it along, that's care you can hold in your hands." Arden thought about her own mother's recipe box, sitting untouched in the kitchen since her death. She'd been afraid to open it, afraid of what that grief might feel like if she let it surface. But watching Fintan honor his wife's memory with such gentle dignity made her wonder if she'd been wrong. Maybe holding on to memories wasn't the same as being held hostage by them. "My mother left recipes too," she said. "I haven't. I couldn't look at them after she died. Grief has its own timeline. No rushing it, no forcing it. Like plants, things grow in their own time." It was such a Fintan thing to say, returning always to the language of gardens, of growth, of patient tending. She found herself smiling despite the heaviness of the topic. "Maybe I'll look at them soon. When I'm ready. You'll know when that is." They stood together in the afternoon light, two people carrying losses, learning slowly how to set them down without forgetting them entirely. The moment was interrupted by Arden's phone, buzzing insistently in her pocket. She pulled it out, saw Claire's name flashing urgently. "I should take this," she said apologetically. "Of course." Fintan returned to his work, giving her privacy without needing to be asked. "Claire, what is it?" Marcus showed up at the office, unannounced. "He's demanding to see you, says he won't leave until he does." Security's getting nervous. Arden felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the old defensive patterns clicking into place. "Tell security to give him 15 minutes, then escort him out if necessary." "I'll be there in 30. She ended the call, stood for a moment gathering herself. Whatever Marcus wanted, it was aggressive enough that he'd abandoned any pretense of professional courtesy. That meant trouble, real trouble, not just competitive posturing. "Bad news?" Fintan asked, his tone careful. "Business complication. I need to head into the office." "Of course. I'll lock up the shed when I'm done here." She nodded, started toward the house, then turned back. "Fintan, thank you for sharing about the recipe card." "About AOIF, it helped." "Any time, Ms. Chase." "Arden," she said, surprising herself. "You can call me Arden." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, pleasure, maybe a hint of warmth. "Arden, then." The drive into the city gave her time to shift mental gears, to pack away the softness of the garden conversation and retrieve the armor she wore in the business world. By the time she reached the 40th floor, she was fully in CEO mode, controlled, strategic, ready for whatever Marcus thought he could throw at her. He was waiting in the reception area, and he'd clearly been there long enough to work himself into a state. His suit was expensive, but rumpled, his tie loosened, his normally careful grooming disheveled. Whatever this was about, it had him rattled. "Marcus," she said coolly, "this is unexpected. We need to talk, privately." His eyes darted to Claire, to the security guard standing discreetly nearby. "My office." She led him inside, closed the door, remained standing to make it clear this wouldn't be a long conversation. "What's so urgent that it couldn't wait for Monday?" "I want to buy Chase Pharmaceuticals." She'd expected many things, but not that. Not so direct, not so desperate. "We're not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price." He pulled out a folder, dropped it on her desk. "I'm prepared to offer 20% above current market valuation. All cash. Deal could close in 60 days. Arden didn't touch the folder. "Why? Why what? Why the urgency? Why the aggression?" "You've been circling for months, Marcus, but this feels like panic." His jaw tightened. "It's a good business opportunity. You should look at the numbers." "I'm sure the numbers are impressive, but I'm more interested in what's motivating them." She studied him, saw the telltale signs she'd learned to read in decades of business dealings. The slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes wouldn't quite hold steady. "You're in trouble. I'm offering you a fortune. You're trying to save yourself." The pieces fell into place with sudden clarity. "Your biologics venture failed, didn't it? The one you mortgaged your company to fund. And now you need an acquisition to show your board, to cover the losses, to make it look like strategic consolidation instead of desperate scrambling." His silence was confirmation enough. "The answer is no, Marcus. Chase Pharmaceuticals isn't going to be your life preserver. You're making a mistake." His voice went hard, threatening. "I could make things very difficult for you. You could try." She moved to the door, opened it. "But I've been in this business longer than you have, and I've survived worse than whatever you think you can do. Claire will see you out." After he left, angry, humiliated, Dangerous in the way cornered animals were dangerous. Arden sat alone in her office, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as dusk settled over the skyline. She should have felt triumphant. She'd faced down a hostile takeover attempt, read the situation correctly, held her ground, but mostly she felt tired of the constant positioning, the games, the way business seemed to require a level of cynicism that bled into everything else. She thought about Fintan with his recipe card, carrying love in his pocket, about the way he tended plants with patience rather than force, about his quiet dignity that didn't need to prove itself through aggression or acquisition. Different worlds, different values. And for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure which world she wanted to inhabit. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rosa. Fintan finished up. Left a note about the fountain pump needing repair. Dinner's ready when you get home. Home. When had the estate started feeling like home again, instead of just a place she slept? She knew the answer. It had started when she'd stopped seeing shadows in every corner, stopped testing people, and started trusting them. When she'd let herself have a real conversation instead of maintaining professional distance at all costs. It had started when she'd met someone who reminded her that goodness still existed if you were brave enough to look for it. The rain came suddenly on a Thursday afternoon, one of those late autumn storms that arrived without warning and transformed the world into something grey and urgent. Arden was in a conference call with the board, discussing third-quarter earnings, when she noticed through her office window that Fintan's jacket was still hanging on the garden shed door. He'd been working on the far side of the property, near the perennial beds that bordered the old stone wall. Too far to have made it back before the downpour started. She tried to focus on the call, on revenue, projections and market share analysis, and the proposed expansion into personalized medicine. But her attention kept drifting to the window, to the rain coming down in sheets, to the jacket hanging uselessly while somewhere out there a man was getting soaked. Arden, Claire's voice pulled her back. Your thoughts on the timeline? Sorry, could you repeat the question? After the call finally ended, she grabbed the jacket and an umbrella, ignored Claire's curious look, and headed out into the storm. The rain was cold, November asserting itself, winter's advance guard making its presence known. She found Fintan exactly where she'd guessed, still working methodically through the beds, his shirt plastered to his back, hair dripping. "Fintan!" She had to shout over the rain. "You forgot your jacket." He looked up, surprised to see her there, soaked through herself despite the umbrella. "Miss Chase, Arden, you shouldn't be out in this." "Neither should you." She held out the jacket. "Come inside." "This can wait. Just need to finish this section. The mulch needs to go down before it gets any colder. It can wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow's Friday. I have to pick up Maeve early for her school recital." Of course he did. Of course he'd prioritized his daughter's school event, rearranged his schedule, which meant pushing work to today, even if today brought a storm. Then it can wait until next week. "Come on, you'll catch pneumonia." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable leaving work unfinished, but the rain was intensifying and even his stubbornness had limits. Together they hurried back to the house, both thoroughly drenched by the time they reached the mudroom. Rosa appeared almost immediately, took one look at them, and disappeared to return with towels. "Good heavens! You both need dry clothes and hot tea." "I'm fine," Fintan said automatically, but his shivering contradicted the statement. "You're not fine. You're soaked to the bone." Arden made a decision. "Rosa, can you find something from my father's closet? They should be close enough in size." "I couldn't," Fintan started to protest. "You can and you will. I'm not sending you home to your daughter in wet clothes." She softened her tone. "Please, at least have some tea and warm up first." He looked like he wanted to argue, but Rosa was already heading upstairs, and Arden was fixing him with a look that brooked no opposition. Finally, he nodded. 20 minutes later, they were both dry and sitting in the kitchen, the informal one where Rosa worked, not the formal dining room Arden rarely used. Fintan wore a pair of her father's old work pants and a flannel shirt, both slightly loose on his leaner frame, but close enough. Arden had changed into comfortable clothes, her hair still damp and curling at the ends. Rosa had made tea and put out shortbread cookies she'd baked that morning, then tactfully disappeared to give them privacy. "I'm sorry about the storm," Arden said, which was absurd. She couldn't control the weather, but she felt responsible somehow for him being caught in it. "Not your fault." Fintan wrapped his hands around the mug, warming them. "I should have checked the forecast more carefully. You were focused on finishing before tomorrow. For Maeve's recital, she's been practicing for weeks. Some song about autumn leaves. Very serious business when you're 8 years old." His face softened the way it always did when he talked about his daughter. "She made me promise I'd be there early, get a seat in the front row." "That's sweet. It's everything." He took a sip of tea. "After Oif died, I promised Maeve I'd never miss the important things. School events, bedtime stories, Sunday stew. The little things that add up to a childhood, to feeling loved and secure." Arden thought about her own childhood, about parents who had been present and attentive despite their busy lives. Her father reading to her every night until she was 12. Her mother teaching her to bake, even though they had staff who could do it better. Those moments had mattered. They'd shaped who she was, or at least who she'd been before life taught her to build walls. "You're a good father," she said quietly. "I'm a trying father. Some days I get it right, some days I don't, but I keep showing up. And I think that's what matters most." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The rain drumming against the windows, the kitchen warm and filled with the scent of tea and shortbread. It felt domestic in a way Arden's life rarely did, simple, unguarded, real. "Can I tell you something?" she asked suddenly. "Of course. When you first started working here, I suspected you of stealing." The words came out in a rush, confessions spilling free before she could reconsider. "The pruning shears went missing, and I immediately assumed you'd taken them. I even set up a test, left money where you'd find it, pretended to sleep to see what you'd do." Fintan's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. "I found the shears later. They were in the potting shed where I'd left them myself. It was my mistake, my fault, but my first instinct was to blame you." She met his eyes, needing him to understand. "It wasn't about you. It was about me, about what I've become. I've been hurt before, betrayed by people I trusted, and I let that turn me into someone who can't see goodness even when it's right in front of her." "That must be exhausting," he said quietly. "It is." It was. She wrapped her own hands around her mug, drawing courage from the warmth. "But you changed something. The way you returned that money without hesitation, the care you take with everything you do, the love you have for your daughter. Watching you reminded me that not everyone is looking for an angle. That integrity still exists. I appreciate you telling me." His voice was careful, measured. "Though I'm sorry you felt you had to test me at all." "So am I. You deserved better than that." He considered her for a long moment, then said, "My wife used to say that hurt people, but healed people heal people. Maybe you're somewhere in between right now. Not quite healed, but not hurting others anymore either. That's growth." The simple wisdom of it, the lack of judgment in his tone, made something in Arden's chest crack open. She'd been bracing for anger or coldness, for him to take offense at her admission. Instead, he was offering understanding, seeing her struggle with compassion rather than condemnation. "I found out how you got this job," she said, changing the subject slightly. "Father Michael at St. Catherine's recommended you." "He did. I volunteer there sometimes, helping with the grounds. When he heard about the opening here, he thought I'd be a good fit. There was a previous employer," Arden continued carefully. "The one before Thomas retired. I made some calls, did some checking after I started to care about getting things right. They gave you a glowing recommendation, but they also mentioned there was some trouble. An accusation that was later cleared." Fintan's jaw tightened slightly, the first sign of real discomfort. "That was a misunderstanding, was it?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his tea. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "I worked for a wealthy family in Greenwich. Good people, or so I thought. Their son, spoiled, entitled, got caught stealing from his parents. Cash, jewelry, things he could pawn. When they discovered it, he blamed me. Said I'd been the one taking things, that he'd seen me do it, but you hadn't. Of course not. But I was the employee, the outsider, and he was family. They wanted to believe him. His hands tightened around the mug. They fired me without severance, threatened legal action if I disputed it. I had a daughter to care for, bills to pay, and fighting them would have meant lawyers, publicity, time I didn't have. So I left. How did you clear your name? I didn't have to. 3 months later, the son got arrested for theft at another house. The family called to apologize, offered my job back, but by then I'd found work elsewhere. Didn't seem worth going back to a place that had been so quick to think the worst of me. The parallel wasn't lost on Arden. She'd been quick to think the worst of him too, just like those people in Greenwich. Different circumstances, same instinct to protect yourself by suspecting others first. I'm so sorry that happened to you. It taught me something important. He looked up, met her eyes. That sometimes the world won't be fair, won't see you clearly, won't give you what you deserve. But you can still choose how you respond. You can let it make you bitter, or you can let it make you careful about how you treat others. You chose the latter. I try to. For Maeve, mostly. Want her to see that you can be hurt and still be kind. That the two things don't have to be connected. Arden felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I think I've been confusing strength with hardness, thinking that if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't be hurt again. But really, I was just lonely. He finished gently, yes, lonely. The rain continued outside, but inside the kitchen felt warm and safe, a space where truths could be spoken without judgment. They sat together, two people who'd been hurt, learning slowly how to trust again, understanding that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but courage. The letter arrived on Monday morning, delivered not to her home, but to her office at Chase Pharmaceuticals. Claire brought it in with the regular mail, but something about her expression made Arden look up from her computer. "This came for you," Claire said, her voice tight. "No return address." And delivered to reception. The envelope was plain white, expensive paper stock, Arden's name typed on a label. Nothing remarkable, except for the sense of wrongness that emanated from it like a warning. She opened it carefully, unfolded the single sheet inside. The letterhead was anonymous, the text brief and devastating. "Miss Chase, you should know that Fintan O'Brien was terminated from his previous position at the merchant estate in Greenwich for theft. Police were nearly involved. The family chose not to press charges only to avoid publicity. He has a history of taking advantage of wealthy employers. Thought you should be informed before he does the same to you. A concerned party." The words blurred as Arden read them once, twice, 3 times. Her chest felt tight, her breath coming short. This couldn't be right. Fintan had told her about Greenwich, about the false accusation, about being cleared when the real thief was caught. But what if he'd lied? The thought arrived with the force of betrayal, sharp and familiar. She'd let her guard down, trusted him, shared things she'd never told anyone. And all along, he might have been exactly what she'd first suspected, a man looking for an opportunity, waiting for the right moment to take advantage. She forced herself to breathe, to think logically. The letter was anonymous, which meant it could be false. Could be someone trying to cause trouble. Could be, but the details were specific. The merchant estate, Greenwich, theft. How would someone make those up with such precision? "Arden?" Claire's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right?" "Find out everything you can about Fintan O'Brien's employment history, especially the Greenwich position. I need verification." "What? Why, what does that letter say?" "Just do it, Claire, please." Claire took the letter, read it, her expression darkening. "This is anonymous. It could be complete fabrication, or it could be the truth I was too naive to see." "You're not naive. You're finally learning to trust again, and someone's trying to sabotage that." But Arden barely heard her. The walls were going back up, automatic defense mechanisms she'd thought she was learning to dismantle. Every conversation with Fintan was replaying in her mind, recontextualized by suspicion. Had he been playing her, using his daughter, his dead wife, his quiet dignity as a cover for something darker? An hour later, Claire returned with her laptop, her face grave. "I found records," she said quietly. "Public records from the Greenwich Police Department. There was an incident at the Merchant Estate. Fintan O'Brien was named in the initial report as a suspect in a theft investigation." The room tilted. "And?" "The case was closed 3 months later when Jonathan Merchant, the son, was arrested at a different location for similar charges. The records show Fintan was cleared, exactly as he told you, but he was initially suspected." "Yes, but wrongly. Arden, this is exactly what he said happened. He was falsely accused and later vindicated." Arden stood, walked to her window, pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She wanted to believe Claire, wanted to believe Fintan, wanted to believe she hadn't been played for a fool again. But the fear was louder than reason. Old wounds screaming that this was Richard all over again. Trust weaponized into betrayal. "I need to talk to him." "Are you sure that's wise right now?" "You're upset. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in weeks." The coldness in her own voice surprised her. "I let myself get distracted, let emotion cloud judgment. That stops now." She left the office before Claire could argue further, drove to the estate with her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. Fintan's truck was in its usual spot near the garden shed. She found him working on the rose beds, preparing them for their winter covering. He looked up as she approached, smiled, that open, genuine smile she'd come to trust, and the sight of it made fury rise in her throat. "Arden, I wasn't expecting to see you until this evening. We need to talk." Her voice came out clipped, professional, the warmth they'd built completely absent. "About your employment history." His smile faded, replaced by confusion. "My employment history?" She thrust the letter at him. "This came to my office this morning. Care to explain?" He read it slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked like pain. When he looked up, his eyes held a sadness that would have moved her if she'd let it. "This is about Greenwich," he said quietly. "Is it true? Were you accused of theft?" "I was accused, yes, but that's all I needed to hear. Arden, please let me explain. This is exactly what I told you about on Thursday. The son who blamed me, the false accusation. I was cleared completely when you got caught somewhere else, when the real thief was caught. I had nothing to do with it." But she was shaking her head, backing away from him, from the garden, from the vulnerability she'd been stupid enough to show. "I trusted you. I told you things I've never told anyone. And all along you've been, what? Waiting for your moment? Planning what you could take?" "No." His voice was firm but pained. "I've never taken anything from you. I would never get off my property." The words came out flat, final. Fintan stood very still, the letter still in his hand, looking at her with an expression that made her want to take everything back and double down simultaneously. "You're firing me. I'm protecting myself. Something I should have done from the beginning. Arden, please. Give me a chance to prove this is false. Let me show you the police records, the clearance documents. Call Father Michael, call the merchants themselves. I said get off my property." Her voice was rising now, control slipping. "I don't want your explanations or your lies. I want you gone." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant something broke in him. His shoulders sagged slightly, the light going out of his eyes. And when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I understand." He set his tools down carefully, methodically, the same precision he brought to everything, walked to his truck without looking back, drove away without protest or argument, leaving Arden standing alone in the garden they'd worked on together. Surrounded by plants he'd tended with such care, she stood there until Rosa found her, tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't remember starting to cry. "What happened?" Rosa's voice was sharp with concern. "I had to fire him, fire Fintan." "Why on earth?" "He lied to me. About his past, about why he was fired in Greenwich." "I got proof, Rosa. I saw the police records." "What records? What are you talking about?" Arden showed her the letter, watched Rosa read it with mounting horror. "This is anonymous," Rosa said. "This is someone trying to hurt you. The records are real. Claire verified them. Did she verify what they actually say? Or just that they exist?" Rosa's tone was harder than Arden had ever heard it, because if you looked at those records properly, you'd see that Fintan was cleared, completely exonerated. This letter is twisting the truth and you fell for it. The words hit like a slap. What? Fintan told you about Greenwich. He told you he was falsely accused and cleared. This letter is counting on you not checking the details, on you letting fear make decisions instead of facts. Arden felt the world tilt again, but differently this time. But Claire said he was initially suspected and later cleared. That's exactly what Fintan told you. But you heard what you were afraid to hear, instead of what was actually said. The truth of it crashed over her like cold water. She'd been so ready to believe the worst, so primed by the letter and her own fears, that she'd twisted Claire's words to match her expectations. She'd seen initially suspected and stopped listening before later cleared. "Oh God," she whispered. "What have I done?" "You hurt a good man who didn't deserve it." Rosa's voice softened slightly. "You let fear win when you were finally learning to be brave." Arden sank onto the stone bench, the letter crumpling in her hands. She'd done exactly what the merchants had done to Fintan. Assumed guilt, dismissed explanations, let suspicion override evidence. She'd become the very thing she'd hated about her own betrayals, and she'd done it to someone who'd shown her nothing but integrity. Arden spent the next 3 hours making calls, each one adding another layer of shame to the crushing weight already pressing on her chest. Father Michael at St. Catherine's spoke carefully, diplomatically, but his disappointment was clear. "Fintan is one of the most honorable men I know. When that situation in Greenwich happened, he could have fought back publicly, could have made a scene, but he chose dignity over vindication. He trusted that the truth would come out eventually, which it did. That takes a strength most of us don't possess. The merchants, the parents, not the son, were more direct." Mrs. Merchant's voice carried genuine regret. "We failed Fintan terribly. Our son was going through a difficult time, and we wanted so desperately to believe him that we ignored the evidence right in front of us. When the truth came out, we offered Fintan his position back with a significant raise and a formal apology, but he declined. He said he couldn't work for people who'd been so quick to think the worst of him. I respected that decision, even as it pained me. Each conversation confirmed what Rosa had already told her. Fintan had been truthful about everything. The anonymous letter had simply weaponized facts, stripped of context, to destroy the trust she'd been building, and it had worked. By late afternoon, Claire arrived at the estate with news that Arden had been expecting but dreading. Marcus sent the letter, Claire said, setting her laptop on the kitchen table, where Arden sat with cold coffee she hadn't touched. I had it trace the delivery. The courier was paid from one of Marcus's shell accounts. Sloppy, he must have been desperate. Why? Arden's voice was hoarse from crying. Why go after Fintan? Because he saw you changing. You've been distracted, his word, not mine. Less focused on the business, softer in negotiations. He thought if he could destroy your trust in Fintan, you'd go back to being the ruthless CEO he could predict and manipulate. Claire paused. He was also probably trying to hurt you personally. Revenge for rejecting his buyout offer. The calculated cruelty of it made Arden's stomach turn. Marcus had seen something genuine growing in her life and decided to burn it down for strategic advantage. And she'd let him. She'd been so afraid of being hurt that she'd hurt herself more thoroughly than any enemy could have. I need to find Fintan, Arden said, standing abruptly. I need to apologize, to explain. I tried calling him, Claire said gently. His phone goes straight to voicemail. I drove by his apartment. His landlord said he and Maeve left a few hours ago. She doesn't know where they went. Panic fluttered in Arden's chest. He wouldn't just leave. He has commitments. Maeve's school. You fired him, Arden. Publicly humiliated him and questioned his integrity. Why would he stay? The truth of it was crushing. She'd taken a man who'd already been falsely accused once, who'd built his life carefully around protecting his daughter and his reputation, and she'd done exactly what he feared most. She'd believed lies over evidence, suspicion over history, fear over truth. Rosa appeared in the doorway. Father Michael called. He said Fintan sometimes goes to the church when he needs to think. It's worth trying. Arden grabbed her keys, then stopped. On the counter, almost unnoticed, sat Fintan's battered lunch cooler. He'd left it behind in his haste to leave. She picked it up, felt its lightness, its emptiness, without the care he usually packed into it. Inside, tucked into the lid where he always kept it, was Maeve's drawing of the garden. But there was something else, too. Something she hadn't seen before. A small brass compass, old and tarnished, with initials engraved on the back, P.O. to F.O. She turned it over in her hands, understanding immediately that this was something precious. A family heirloom, probably from the grandfather he'd mentioned. The one who'd taught him about gardens and patience and tending things carefully, and he'd left it behind. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. A compass was meant to guide you home, to keep you true to your path. By leaving it here, Fintan was saying he'd lost his way, or that this place was no longer home for him. She tucked it carefully in her pocket and headed for the car. St. Catherine's was a small stone church on the edge of town, surrounded by grounds that Fintan had mentioned maintaining as volunteer work. Arden had never been there, but she found it easily enough parked in the small lot and walked around to the back, where Father Michael had suggested she look. The church garden was modest but beautifully maintained, beds of late-season chrysanthemums, ornamental grasses gone golden in the autumn light, a small fountain that trickled peacefully. And there, kneeling by a flower bed with a broken ceramic pot in his hands, was Fintan. He didn't look up as she approached, though she was certain he'd heard her. He was fitting the pieces of the pot back together with careful attention, his movements precise despite the impossibility of the task. Some breaks couldn't be fixed, not completely. "Fintan," she said softly. "Miss Chase." His voice was polite, distant, professional. All the warmth they'd built completely gone. "I'll clear out any personal items I left at the property by tomorrow. You won't have to see me again. I don't want you to clear out. I want you to come back." Now he did look up, and the pain in his eyes made her breath catch. "Why would I do that?" "Because I was wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong." She moved closer, careful not to crowd him. "The letter was fake, not the facts, but the context. It was sent by Marcus Hendrick, a business rival trying to hurt me by destroying what you and I were building. The police records confirm everything you told me. You were falsely accused and completely cleared. I know what the records say. I lived it. I should have believed you. I should have checked the facts before I—" Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Fintan. I let fear make me cruel, and you didn't deserve any of it." He set the pot pieces down carefully, stood to face her. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the accusation. I've been accused before, survived it. The worst part was seeing you look at me like I was nothing. Like everything I'd shown you, everything we'd shared, meant nothing against your fear. I know, and I hate that I did that to you. My wife used to say that trust is like a garden. Takes time to grow, needs constant tending, and can be destroyed in a single storm." He looked away, jaw tight. "I thought we were building something, but at the first sign of trouble, you burned it down. I panicked. I've been hurt before, betrayed by people I trusted, and when that letter came, all those old wounds they took over. I stopped thinking and started reacting, and what happens next time something threatens you? Next time someone plants a seed of doubt?" He shook his head. "I can't live like that, Arden, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, wondering when you'll decide I'm not worth trusting again. My daughter can't live like that either." The mention of Maeve cut deep. "I would never—" "You already did. Maeve asked me why we were leaving, why she had to say goodbye to her friends at school. I told her we were moving for new opportunities. But she's 8, not stupid. She knows something bad happened." Arden felt tears tracking down her face. "Please, let me make this right. Let me prove that I can be better, that I can be worthy of the trust you showed me." "How?" "With apologies? With explanations?" His voice was tired more than angry now. "I forgave the merchants eventually, but I never went back to work for them. Some things can't be undone." She pulled the compass from her pocket, held it out to him. "You left this. Your grandfather's compass." He looked at it but didn't take it. "I know. A compass is supposed to guide you home, To keep you on the right path, sometimes you need to find a new path. This one led somewhere that hurt too much. Or maybe, she said, stepping closer, maybe it led exactly where it was supposed to, and I'm the one who got lost. Please, Fintan, don't let my fear destroy something good. Don't let Marcus win. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the compass, at her, at the broken pot on the ground. Finally, he took the compass, turned it over in his hands. My grandfather gave this to me when I left Ireland. Said a man who knows where he's going can weather any storm. But lately I don't know where I'm going anymore. Maybe we could figure it out together, slowly, carefully. Like you said, you can't rush growth. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, using my own words against me, learning from a good teacher. He closed his hand around the compass, met her eyes. I need time, Arden. Time to think, to decide if this is something I can risk again. For me, yes, but especially for Maeve. She's been through enough loss. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll prove to you that I can be someone who deserves your trust. And if I decide, I can't come back. The question hurt, but she owed him honesty. Then I'll understand. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that I let fear rob me of something precious. He nodded slowly, tucked the compass back into his pocket. I'll call you. When I've decided, it wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was possibility, and right now, that was more than she deserved. 3 days passed with no word from Fintan, 3 days during which Arden functioned on autopilot, attended meetings, signed documents, made decisions that felt increasingly hollow. She dealt with Marcus through official channels, documenting his sabotage attempt and making it clear that any further interference would result in legal action. He'd retreated, his own vulnerabilities too exposed to risk escalation, but the victory felt meaningless without someone to share it with. On Thursday evening, as November darkness settled early over the estate, Arden found herself in the garden. The roses needed their final winter preparation, work that Fintan had been scheduled to do before she'd fired him. She had no idea what she was doing, but she knelt by the beds anyway, trying to remember what he'd said about proper cutting angles and protecting the crowns. She was making a mess of it, she knew, but the physical work felt like penance. "You're cutting too low," a quiet voice said behind her. She turned so quickly she nearly fell. Fintan stood at the edge of the garden, hands in his jacket pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Fintan. His name came out breathless with hope and fear. "You came. I said I'd call. Thought showing up might be better." He moved closer, knelt beside her, gently took the pruning shears from her hands. "May I?" She nodded, unable to speak, watching as he demonstrated the proper technique, cutting just above an outward-facing bud, angling away from the center to promote healthy growth. His movements were sure, practiced, beautiful in their efficiency. "I've been thinking," he said, not looking at her, focused on the roses. "About what you said. About fear and trust, and whether some things can be repaired, and I went to see Father Michael. Told him everything, about the letter, about your reaction, about my own hurt and anger." He finished one cut, moved to the next plant. He reminded me that everyone deserves a second chance. That holding on to hurt doesn't protect you, it just makes you smaller. He's a wise man, he is. He also said something else. Fintan paused, finally looked at her. He said that the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, but what they do after. Whether they own them, learn from them, try to be better. "I want to be better," Arden said quietly. "I want to be someone worthy of your trust. I know you do. I've seen it. The way you've been changing, opening up, letting yourself be vulnerable. That takes courage, especially after you've been hurt." He set down the shears, pulled something from his pocket. A small ceramic pot, clearly the one from the church garden, now repaired with careful seams of gold. "Kintsugi," he explained, holding it up to catch the fading light. "Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The philosophy is that the breakage and repair are part of the object's history, should be honored rather than hidden. That something broken can be more beautiful for having been broken." Arden touched the golden seams gently. "It's beautiful. Father Michael helped me make it. Said I needed to understand that broken things can be made whole again, just differently than they were before. The cracks don't disappear, but they become part of the strength. Is that... She had to clear her throat. Is that what you're saying about us? I'm saying I'm willing to try. If you are... But we both need to understand that we're different people now than we were 3 days ago. We've been broken, and if we repair this, the cracks will still show. We'll have to live with that. I can live with that, she said. As long as you're willing to let me try. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the gathering darkness. I need you to understand something. If you doubt me again, if fear makes you cruel again, I won't come back. Not because I don't care, but because Maeve needs stability. I can't put her through this pattern. I understand. And I promise, not that I'll be perfect, but that I'll communicate instead of assuming. That I'll give you the benefit of doubt I should have given from the start. Then we start over, slowly, carefully, like planting something new. He offered her his hand, and she took it, feeling the calluses, the strength, the steadiness she'd almost thrown away. They stood together in the darkening garden, two people who'd been broken, learning to be whole again, understanding that some repairs took time, but were worth the patient work of healing. There's one condition, Fintan said. Anything. I meet Maeve first. Explain what happened in terms she can understand. Make sure she's comfortable before I bring her back here. She's been through enough uncertainty, of course. Whatever she needs, whatever you both need. He nodded, satisfied. Then, almost shyly, he held out the repaired pot. This is for you, a reminder that broken things can heal. Arden took it carefully, cradling it like the precious gift it was. Not just a pot, but a promise, a symbol of hope that they could take what had shattered and make it into something stronger, more beautiful, more honest than what they'd had before. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me another chance. Thank you for being brave enough to ask for one. They stood together as full darkness settled, and somewhere in the silence, Arden felt something shift. Not a return to what had been, but the beginning of something new. Something built on truth and honesty, and the understanding that trust was a choice you made every day, not a guarantee you could demand. Fintan came back to work the following Monday, and though the change was subtle, it was profound. There was a new carefulness between them, a mutual awareness of fragility, of how deliberately trust had to be rebuilt. A week after his return, Fintan approached her. Maeve would like to meet you. If you're willing. Arden's heart jumped. Of course. Whenever she's ready. Saturday afternoon. Saturday's perfect. When Saturday arrived, Arden was nervous in a way board meetings had never made her. Rosa found it amusing. You face down hostile boards without breaking a sweat, but an 8-year-old has you pacing. She's important to him. That makes her important to me. When Fintan's truck pulled up, Arden opened the door to find them standing together, his hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. Maeve studied her with serious dark eyes remarkably like her father's. You have a really big house, the girl said. I do. Would you like to see the gardens? They walked through the estate slowly, Arden pointing out features she thought might interest a child. Outside, Maeve touched a bare rose cane gently. Daddy says your mom planted these. She did. She loved roses. Used to say that anything worth having required thorns. My mom loved flowers too. I don't remember much about her, but Daddy shows me pictures. The simple statement, delivered without drama, made Arden's chest tighten. I'm sure she was beautiful. Daddy says I look like her, that I have her smile. They reached the stone bench by the fountain, and Maeve climbed up. Daddy was really sad when you had that fight. Arden glanced at Fintan, who gave her a small nod. She sat beside Maeve, chose her words carefully. I hurt your father's feelings very badly. I was afraid of being hurt myself, and I let that fear make me say cruel things that weren't true. Did you say you were sorry? I did. But sometimes sorry isn't enough by itself. You have to show people you mean it. Maeve considered this. Like when I broke Jenny's crayon and had to help her with her art project for a whole week. Exactly like that. Are you helping with Daddy's projects? I'm trying to be a better person, the kind your father deserves. Daddy says you're learning to trust again. That it's hard, but important. They sat together for a while, Maeve asking questions about the plants, about what the garden looked like in spring. Eventually, Rosa appeared with hot chocolate and cookies, and they moved inside to the warmth of the kitchen. When it was time to leave, Maeve hugged Rosa goodbye, then turned to Arden with a measured assessment. "Thank you for showing me the gardens. You're welcome any time." "Maeve, truly." The girl studied her another moment, then stepped forward and hugged Arden quickly, fiercely, before retreating to her father's side. "I like her, Daddy," she announced. "She's got sad eyes, like you used to have, but I think she's getting better." Over the following weeks, a new rhythm established itself. Fintan returned to his regular schedule, but now there were shared coffee breaks, conversations that ranged into the personal. Maeve came back occasionally, her presence transforming the estate into something that felt alive. December arrived with early snow. One afternoon, as fat snowflakes drifted down, Arden brought Fintan hot coffee while he worked. Maeve asked if she could come help with Christmas decorations, he said. "If that's all right." "Of course it's all right. I'd love that." They stood together in the gathering snow, and he said quietly, "Maeve's getting attached. To you, to Rosa, to this place. I need to know that's okay, that you're not going to pull away." "I won't, I promise." "She's wonderful, Fintan. You both are. And I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her then, really looked. "I believe you." That Saturday, Maeve arrived with art supplies and determination to make the estate properly festive. Together with Rosa, they transformed the house with garlands and lights and handmade ornaments. Christmas Day arrived clear and cold. Maeve came early, carrying a gift bag she'd wrapped herself. Inside were two items: a small framed drawing of the garden in summer, labeled Arden's Garden, and a bookmark decorated with pressed flowers and the words, "For someone who's learning to grow." "I wanted you to remember that even in winter, spring always comes back," Maeve said. Dinner was simple but perfect. Pot roast and vegetables, Rosa's brown bread, and the Irish stew from Eoif's recipe. They ate in the informal dining room, conversation flowing easily, laughter coming naturally. After dinner, as Rosa and Maeve cleaned up, Fintan pulled Arden aside. "I have something for you too." He drew a small package from his pocket, a seed packet, handmade, the paper folded around seeds he'd collected. "Rose seeds, Arden's Garden. Plant in spring with hope. They're from your mother's roses," he explained. "You can plant them in April, grow your own roses from her legacy." She took the packet with trembling hands. "Thank you for this." "For everything." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "We're giving each other that chance." Then, because the moment called for it, she said softly, "Fintan, I think I'm falling in love with you." He smiled, that genuine, warm smile. "I think I've been falling in love with you too, probably since you first pretended to sleep on the couch." "I really wasn't sleeping," she admitted with a laugh. "I know. But you were trying, and that mattered more than succeeding." He kissed her then, gentle and brief, but full of promise. From the kitchen came Maeve's delighted squeal. "I knew it. Rosa owes me $5. That night, Arden placed Maeve's drawing on her bedside table, the seed packet beside the kintsugi pot on her desk, and lay in bed thinking about spring, about planting roses, about tending something patiently and trusting that care would lead to beauty. 3 months later, on a mild April afternoon, when the world was shaking off winter's hold, Arden stood in the garden with the small trowel in one hand and the packet of rose seeds in the other. The seeds had spent the winter in her refrigerator, going through the cold stratification process Fintan had carefully explained. Now they were ready to become something new while honoring what had come before. Fintan worked beside her, preparing the soil with patient attention. Maeve was nearby in her own small plot, planting wildflower seeds Rosa had helped her choose. "Not too deep," Fintan reminded Arden gently. "Rose seeds need light to germinate. Just press them into the soil, barely covered." She followed his instructions, placing each seed with care, thinking about her mother, about how life continued in unexpected ways if you gave it the chance. "Will they all grow?" Maeve asked, dirt smudged on her cheek. "Probably not all of them," Fintan admitted, "but enough will survive if we tend them properly." That's the important part. Not controlling the outcome, but doing the work. Arden smiled at the metaphor. You couldn't control whether seeds grew, whether trust held, whether love lasted. You could only do the work, the daily patient work of showing up and tending carefully. The past 3 months had been exactly that, careful tending. Their relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee into something richer. They were friends first, partners in the garden, and increasingly they were becoming something more. The romance had developed slowly, respectfully, with Maeve's well-being always central. But Maeve, with the clarity children possessed, had simply accepted what the adults were still figuring out. You make Daddy happy, she'd told Arden one afternoon while baking with Rosa. His eyes smile now, not just his mouth. The business had changed too. Marcus had resigned. His company eventually absorbed after his gamble failed. Under Arden's leadership, Chase Pharmaceuticals had shifted direction, still profitable, but with stronger emphasis on ethical practices and employee welfare. She'd established a scholarship program for employees' children, increased benefits, made decisions that prioritized people alongside profits. There, Fintan said, sitting back. That's everything planted. Now we wait and see what grows. How long before we know? Roses from seed can take a while. Weeks for germination if we're lucky, months to see real growth. Rather like trust, actually. You and your metaphors. You love my metaphors. I do. She met his eyes, let the words carry their full weight. I love a lot of things about you. His expression softened, and he reached over to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The feeling is entirely mutual. Daddy and Arden sitting in a tree, Maeve sang out laughing. K-S-S-I-N-G. Rosa appeared on the terrace, waving them in. Lunch is ready. And Maeve, wash those hands before you touch anything in my clean kitchen, after lunch. While Maeve and Rosa sketched party ideas, Maeve had insisted they host a garden party in June. Fintan and Arden took coffee to the library. Can I tell you something? Fintan asked, his tone serious. Always. When you fired me, I was so angry. Not just at you, but at myself, for trusting again. But that experience taught me something I needed to learn, that running from pain doesn't protect you, it just makes you smaller. That the only way to live fully is to risk being hurt. Father Michael told you that. He did. But more importantly, you showed me. When you came to find me, when you apologized without excuses, that took real courage. He shifted closer, his hand cupping her face. I didn't want Maeve to learn that people don't deserve second chances, or that walls are safer than bridges. What did you want the lesson to be? That love is worth the risk, that broken things can heal, that sometimes the people we least expect become the ones we can't imagine living without. He paused. I love you, Arden, completely, without reservation. I love your strength and your vulnerability, how you've grown and the courage it took to change. Tears streamed down her face. I love you too, so much that it scares me sometimes. Then don't let it be empty. Let it be full of us, of Maeve, of Rosa, and all the people we're choosing to let in. I want that. I want all of that. He kissed her deeply, and from the doorway came Maeve's delighted squeal. I told you they were in love. Maeve's voice suddenly became smaller, more vulnerable. Does this mean Arden is going to be my mom? Because I'd like that. Arden knelt to Maeve's eye level. I could never replace your mom, and I wouldn't try to. But if you're willing, I'd love to be part of your family. To be someone who loves you and is there for all the important things, like a bonus mom. Exactly like a bonus mom. Maev nodded seriously. Okay, but I get to be flower girl at the wedding. Deal, Arden said, laughing through her tears. The spring progressed into early summer. The rose seeds germinated, not all of them, but enough. They would take years to mature, but that was okay. Good things took time. The garden party happened in mid-June, exactly as Maeve had imagined. The estate filled with people and laughter, children running through gardens, adults admiring Rosa's beds. Fintan gave informal tours, and Arden watched him with pride and love. You've done something remarkable, Claire said, finding Arden near the fountain. 6 months ago, this place was a mausoleum. Now it's alive. It's not me. It's them. Arden gestured to where Fintan showed children how to identify herbs, Maeve assisting. They brought life back. You let them. That's the remarkable part. Later, as sunset approached, Arden stood on the terrace with Fintan, watching the garden glow in golden light. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I knew was possible." He pulled something from his pocket, a key, simple and brass, worn with age. "This was the key to my grandfather's house in Cork. He gave it to me when I left Ireland, said it was to remind me that home isn't a place, it's the people you love. Fintan, I want you to have it. Not because I'm asking you to marry me, though I am, eventually, but because you've become my home, Arden. You and this place and the life we're building. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." She took the key with trembling hands. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The ability to trust, to love, to believe in good things. We've given each other that. And we'll keep giving it to each other every day. I choose this. I choose you. I choose us. Then that's enough. More than enough." That night, after everyone had left, Arden walked through the quiet house. She touched the kintsugi pot on her desk, looked at Maeve's drawing on her wall, at the photograph showing Fintan and Maeve and herself together, all of them laughing, chosen family spanning generations. Rosa, with her steady wisdom, Arden finding her way, Maeve representing hope, and Fintan binding them together with patient love. She walked to her bedroom window overlooking the gardens. In the moonlight, she could just make out the rose beds. The new seedlings too small to see, but they're nonetheless growing slowly in the dark, doing the invisible work of putting down roots. In 6 months everything had changed. From a woman who tested her gardener's honesty to one learning to trust again. From isolation to connection, from fear to love, from winter to spring. Home wasn't a place you inherited or purchased. It was the people who saw you and chose to stay. It was laughter in the kitchen and dirt under fingernails and a child's drawing on your wall. It was second chances and patient tending and the courage to let yourself be known. She thought about those rose seeds tucked into soil, invisible but working. With care and patience, they would grow. They would bloom. They would add beauty to a world that needed it. And so would she. So would Fintan. So would Maeve. Together, they would grow. Arden climbed into bed with a smile on her face and hope in her heart, knowing tomorrow would bring new growth, new opportunities to choose love over fear. And somewhere in the garden, hidden in darkness but working tirelessly toward light, rose seeds germinated. Small miracles happening in secret, preparing to transform into something beautiful, just like her life had transformed. Just like she had transformed from ashes to roses, from winter to spring, from fear to love. Outside, the moon traced silver paths through the garden, illuminating the bench where they'd sat together, the fountain where they'd talked, the beds where they'd planted hope, and in the rich, dark soil, invisible but vital, new life stirred and grew, always growing, always becoming, always reaching toward light.